You have been asking wrongly all your life, not with words, not with begging, but with fear, doubt, and worry. The true act of asking is not found in pleading to the heavens, but in assuming the state of the wish fulfilled. To ask is not to beg, it is to accept. When you desire something, you must rise into its feeling, clothe yourself in its reality, and live as though it were already true. That is asking. You are not addressing a distant God, you are speaking to your own imagination, the creative power within you. Words fall empty if they are not filled with the conviction of feeling. To ask correctly is to enter the end in consciousness and dwell there faithfully. Do not concern yourself with the means, for the how belongs to God. Your task is only to accept the end as done. Asking is not repetition, it is surrender. It is not hope, it is faith. The moment you assume you have asked, and the answer is set in motion. Practice tonight. As you lie upon your bed, imagine the world as you would see it if your desire were already fulfilled. Feel the joy, the gratitude, the relief of its reality. That is the prayer that never fails. That is how you ask. So I say to you, stop pleading, stop waiting, and start assuming. The moment you dare to feel the wish fulfilled, you have asked, and in that moment, it is yours. Asking is assuming the wish fulfilled, for to ask in the true sense is not to petition or plead, but to embody the state of already having. When you take on the feeling that your desire is realized, you have asked, and the answer is set in motion. You are no longer reaching outward, but turning inward, knowing the creative power is within. To assume is to accept. It is the silent confidence that what you desire is already yours. Asking is not an outward act, but an inward surrender to the reality imagined as present and alive. True asking is acceptance, not begging. For begging implies lack, while acceptance implies possession. When you beg, you affirm the distance between you and your desire, reinforcing the belief that it is absent. But when you accept, you silently acknowledge that what you seek is already yours in the unseen, waiting only for your recognition. Asking is not a cry to some distant power, but an inner alignment with the state of fulfillment. It is choosing to feel now what you once reserved for later. The one who accepts moves in quiet confidence, not in desperation, because they know the unseen reality is as real as the visible world. Acceptance requires trust, for it demands that you give up the struggle of wondering when or how. You no longer plead because you no longer doubt. Instead, you carry yourself with the assurance of one who has already received. The world eventually mirrors this inner acceptance. For creation is finished, and every possibility exists now. To ask is simply to assume, and to live from that assumption, refusing to contradict it with thoughts of lack. And in doing so, you prove that asking is the art of faithful acceptance. Words without feeling are empty, for it is not the sound of the words that moves creation, but the depth of the emotion that accompanies them. To repeat phrases without embodying their reality is to scatter seeds upon barren soil. The creative power within you does not respond to mere utterances, but to the conviction impressed upon the subconscious through feeling. You may say 1,000 times that you are wealthy, loved, or free, but if your heart denies it and your emotions cling to lack, the words pass into the void without life. Feeling is the secret, for it is the bridge between imagination and manifestation. Every word you speak inwardly or outwardly must be clothed in the sensation of its truth. When you declare, I am, you must feel the weight and substance of that state as though it were your present experience. This is the difference between idle talk and creative prayer. Words are the shell, feeling is the life within them. Without feeling, words are shadows without form, powerless to shape reality. But once feeling breathes into them, they become alive, carrying with them the creative force that molds the outer world into the likeness of the inner assumption, into the state of the end in consciousness. For the end is the place where all power resides. To live in the end is to rise above the question of when, how, or through whom the desire shall come, and to rest entirely in the assurance that it already is. Consciousness is the only reality, and whatever you occupy inwardly must eventually solidify into the facts of your world. When you dare to enter the end, you step beyond appearances, beyond the evidence of your senses, and you claim the reality unseen as though it were already manifest. This act is not imagination as a fleeting daydream, but as a deliberate dwelling. You must see, hear, and feel from the end, making it more vivid than the outer world. If you desire freedom, then enter the state of being free now in consciousness. Walk as the one who is already free. Think from the perspective of that liberty, and carry yourself with the quiet dignity of its possession. If you long for love, then feel the warmth of being cherished and secure, and let that assumption mold your behavior and outlook. The outer world will protest and present the evidence of delay, yet to live in the end is to ignore those voices and persist in the unseen reality. Faithful dwelling is the price you pay, for every moment spent in the end impresses upon the subconscious the truth of that state. Soon the world must conform, because the world is nothing more than yourself pushed out. Creation is already finished, and the end you seek exists now as a possibility waiting for you to claim it. To enter the end is to accept that you are already the person you wish to be. It is to shift your identity, to abandon the old self that hoped and wished, and to embody the self that already possesses. Remain there in thought, in feeling, and in imagination until it becomes natural, and what you have inwardly assumed will clothe itself in the outer facts of life. Do not worry about the how. For the moment you ask yourself how, you descend into doubt and take upon yourself the burden that belongs only to the unseen power. The human mind is quick to analyze, to measure, to calculate the steps by which a desire may come, but imagination is not bound by such limitations. The law of assumption does not concern itself with the mechanics of unfolding. It concerns itself only with the acceptance of the end. To dwell upon the how is to confess that you do not believe the end is already yours, for if you truly felt it real, you would not question the road that leads there. The how belongs to a wisdom beyond your conscious reasoning. Life rearranges itself in perfect order once you dare to accept the state of fulfillment. The right people, opportunities, and conditions move into place without your conscious manipulation. It is not your business to chart the invisible currents that carry your desire into form. It is only your task to persist in the state of already being or having what you seek. This is why faith is so vital. For faith is the refusal to speculate on the means. Faith is the inner knowing that the unseen hand will shape all circumstances to mirror the assumption you hold. When you become entangled in the how, you limit the infinite to the narrow boundaries of your reasoning. You begin to imagine that your desire can only come by a certain channel, at a certain time, or through a specific person, and in doing so, you block the greater flow that knows countless ways. Release the how, and you open yourself to the miraculous. Your only true concern is to live in the end, to carry the feeling of the wish fulfilled so consistently that it becomes your natural dwelling place. As you persist, you discover that events fall into place with a perfection you could never have designed. What seemed impossible becomes simple, and what appeared far off arrives with ease. The how was never meant for you to manage. It is the domain of the creative power that works through all things. You are not to labor over the unfolding, but to rest in the assurance of fulfillment. The seed does not ask how it will sprout. It simply contains within itself the pattern of its own growth, and the soil and the season conspire to bring it forth. So it is with your desire. The assumption is the seed, your feeling is the soil, and time itself bends to produce the harvest. To worry about the how is to dig up the seed and disturb its growth. Your task is to plant it in faith, water it with persistence, and allow the unseen process to complete its work. Asking is surrender, not repetition. For the act of true asking is not found in the constant petitioning of words, but in the quiet yielding of self to the reality already secured. Many believe that asking means to beg endlessly, to repeat prayers as though the universe is deaf, but this is not asking. It is doubt disguised as devotion. The more one repeats without surrender, the more one affirms the absence of what is desired. But surrender is different. Surrender is the calm acceptance that the desire is already yours in consciousness, and therefore must reveal itself in form. When you surrender, you let go of the restless questioning, the mental strain, and the urge to control the outcome. You do not seek reassurance from the outer world because you have already claimed the inner certainty. Asking in its true sense is a one-time act of assumption. The moment you enter the state of the wish fulfilled, you have asked, and your subconscious has received the impression. There is no need to repeat, for creation is finished and your acceptance seals the prayer. What follows is not begging but dwelling, not repetition, but persistence in the feeling that it is done. Surrender requires faith, and faith requires imagination. To surrender is to let the invisible feel more real than the visible, to trust the unseen cause rather than the seen effect. When you accept the end as present, you surrender the old self that lived in lack, and you begin to live from the new self who has received. This is why surrender is not weakness but strength, for it places you in union with the creative power that governs all life. You cease struggling against appearances and instead embrace the deeper reality within. Repetition without surrender becomes noise. It is like knocking on a door that has already been opened but refusing to step inside. The universe does not respond to noise but to conviction. The surrendering soul knows that the act of asking has already been completed the moment the assumption was taken on. From that moment forward, the work is not to ask again, but to remain faithful to the state, to resist the temptation to return to doubt, and to let every thought, action, and feeling align with the reality assumed. Asking as surrender is the end of striving. It is the quiet confidence that life will mirror what has been accepted within. The more one repeats without surrender, the more one delays, for repetition keeps the desire alive as a hope rather than a fact. Surrender, however, transforms hope into certainty. It allows you to rest, to feel gratitude, to carry yourself as one who has received rather than one still waiting. When you understand this, you see that asking is not about the length of the prayer or the number of words, but the depth of acceptance. The moment you surrender to the inner reality, you release all effort and open the way for the unseen to shape the outer world in perfect order. This is the secret hidden in the words asking is surrender, not repetition. Faith replaces hope in the act of asking, for hope forever waits while faith boldly claims. Hope looks toward tomorrow and says, "One day, it shall be mine." But faith speaks in the present and declares, "It is already mine." To remain in hope is to dwell in uncertainty, to stretch your desire endlessly into the future without ever drawing it into the now. Hope is the language of longing, but faith is the language of possession. The one who hopes still sees the desire as distant, but the one who asks in faith takes hold of it in consciousness and lives from its reality. When you ask, you must not ask with the spirit of hoping, for hope implies lack. To say, "I hope this comes to pass," is to confess you do not yet have it, and the subconscious only accepts the feeling you live in. Asking in hope is asking in absence, but asking in faith is asking in fulfillment. The moment you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you have already shifted your inner state, and that shift is the true act of asking. Faith steps into the invisible and rests there as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Faith is the assurance of things unseen, the confidence that what you accept inwardly will inevitably appear outwardly. When you ask in faith, you surrender the old question of when and how, for those questions belong to the realm of doubt. Hope keeps you looking for signs, watching the clock, and waiting for conditions to change. But faith closes the gap by accepting the end as present. The one who lives in faith does not beg the unseen for proof, but walks as though proof were already established. In faith, you do not need evidence, for your inner assumption is the evidence. Asking in faith means you move beyond words and enter into feeling. Words may express your desire, but only faith gives them life. You may repeat affirmations endlessly, but if they are charged only with hope and not faith, they fall empty. Faith clothes every word with conviction and impresses it upon the subconscious as truth. This is why the act of asking is complete the moment faith is applied, for the subconscious has accepted the feeling as real, and the law of assumption begins its work. To cultivate faith, you must dare to feel now what reason tells you is impossible. You must ignore the testimony of your senses and trust the deeper reality within imagination. Faith demands that you live from the end, that you assume the attitude of one who has already received. It is not a matter of forcing the outer world into shape. It is a matter of dwelling in the inner certainty until the outer reflects it. The world is but yourself pushed out, and what you faithfully hold within must be mirrored without. Hope may comfort you for a moment, but it does not transform. Hope postpones, but faith fulfills. When you ask in faith, you no longer wait, you live as if it were already so. Every thought, every feeling, every action begins to flow from the state of fulfillment. You no longer strive, no longer beg, no longer wonder, you simply know. This knowing is not arrogance but alignment with the creative power that shapes reality. To live in faith is to live in union with that power, for you and the Father are one in imagination. So when you ask, do not hope vaguely that life may grant your desire at some distant hour. Step into faith, assume the wish fulfilled, and dwell there with persistence. Hope looks forward, but faith rests now. Hope waits, but faith lives. Faith replaces hope in the act of asking, because asking is not about pleading for a future gift, but about surrendering to the present reality of what is already yours in consciousness. Imagination is the true place of prayer, for it is within imagination that every seed of desire is planted and every act of creation is begun. The outer world is nothing more than a reflection of the inner state, and to believe prayer is an utterance of words alone is to miss its essence. Prayer is not in the length of speech, the repetition of phrases, or the intensity of outward performance. It is in the inner vision and the feeling that accompanies it. When you close your eyes and dare to see yourself as you long to be, when you clothe that vision with the feeling of reality, you are praying in the only way that truly creates. Imagination carries the power to transcend the facts of the senses and enter the realm of cause. The senses may argue that lack is present, that failure surrounds you, that your dream is far away, but imagination ignores the evidence of the visible and shapes a new world within. That act is prayer. The moment you enter the assumption of the wish fulfilled in imagination, you have lifted your prayer to the creative power that is always responding. Words without imagination are powerless, but imagination without words is complete. It is the inner image felt as real that impresses the subconscious and sets the unseen process in motion. When you understand imagination as prayer, you no longer beg or plead with some distant God, for God is found in your own wonderful human imagination. To pray is to assume the state you desire and to live there in thought and feeling until it hardens into fact. Every true prayer is answered, because every impression made upon the subconscious must express itself in the outer world. This is why imagination is not a vain fantasy, but the workshop of reality. To dwell in imagination faithfully is to plant the seed in fertile soil. The longer you remain there, the stronger the impression, and the more inevitable the manifestation. Consider what happens when you imagine vividly. You feel the emotions you would feel if it were already so. You hear the words you would hear if your desire were fulfilled. You see the scenes you would see if your prayer were answered. In those moments, the subconscious accepts the experience as real, for it does not distinguish between what is outwardly happening and what is inwardly assumed. To it, the imagined event is the lived event. This is why imagination is prayer. It bypasses the limitations of the outer world and writes directly upon the canvas of the inner world, from which all creation springs. If you treat imagination as idle daydreaming, you weaken its force. But when you enter it deliberately and with feeling, you discover its creative power. Prayer ceases to be a matter of pleading and becomes a matter of assuming. You are no longer one who waits for circumstances to change. You are one who changes circumstances by first changing your inner state. Imagination is the secret chamber of prayer, the holy of holies where you commune with the infinite. When you close your eyes and dare to believe what you see within, you are speaking directly to God, for imagination and God are one. True prayer is not repeated endlessly, for once the state is assumed, the prayer is complete. You do not need to ask again, because you have already impressed the subconscious with the reality of your desire. From that point onward, your task is simply to remain faithful to that assumption, refusing to contradict it with doubt or fear. To pray is to live in the end, to walk in imagination as though your desire were already fulfilled. That dwelling is the highest form of prayer, for it acknowledges that creation is finished and that you need only accept your portion of it. Every great teacher has declared that what you ask for, believe you have received, and it shall be yours. This is not a command to beg until you are heard, but an invitation to imagine until you accept. Belief is nothing more than sustained imagination clothed in feeling. When you know this, you stop looking outward for signs and begin looking inward for conviction. The prayer that moves mountains is not spoken with lips, but with imagination alive with faith. Imagination is the true place of prayer because it is the meeting ground of desire and fulfillment. It is where you step into the unseen and claim it as present. It is where you rise beyond appearances and assume the higher truth of your being. To pray rightly is to imagine rightly, to give form and substance in consciousness to what you wish to see in the world. As you do this faithfully, the world cannot help but reflect your inner prayer, for the outer is nothing but the inner made visible. Imagination is the altar, imagination is the sanctuary. Imagination is the power through which every prayer is heard and answered. Practice assuming your desire before sleep. For the moments just before you surrender to the depth of rest, hold the key to impressing your subconscious mind with the reality of your assumption. The conscious mind, with all its reasoning, distractions, and doubts, grows quiet as you prepare for sleep, and in that quiet, the subconscious becomes most receptive. It is in this delicate transition between wakefulness and sleep that your inner world gains the greatest access to the creative power that shapes your outer reality. What you carry into sleep, you carry into the depths of being, and from that seed planted in the silence, life begins to organize itself in ways unseen. When you practice assuming your desire before sleep, you must not do so with effort or strain, but with ease and faith. Let the day's worries dissolve and gently clothe yourself in the state of the wish fulfilled. If you long for abundance, lie down and imagine yourself already in possession of wealth, feeling the relief and gratitude of financial freedom. If you desire love, close your eyes and feel the embrace of companionship, the warmth of being chosen and cherished. If you seek health, imagine the vitality flowing through your body, the ease of movement, and the joy of strength. Do not force the picture, for forcing creates resistance. Instead, allow it to arise naturally, as though you are remembering something that has already occurred. This practice is powerful because sleep itself is a kind of death to the conscious mind. The reasoning faculty, which so often interferes with faith, withdraws, and what remains is pure receptivity. The subconscious does not argue, does not analyze, does not reject. It only accepts the impressions you bring to it. Therefore, what you feel and imagine in the moments before sleep becomes the pattern impressed upon the deeper self, and that pattern must find expression in the waking world. You cannot plant one seed in the night and expect another to grow in the day. The subconscious faithfully brings forth the likeness of what it has received, and so you must be deliberate in what you give it. When practiced faithfully, this nightly assumption becomes a habit that reshapes your entire life. Instead of drifting to sleep rehearsing the troubles of the day, you turn your mind toward the end you desire. Instead of lying in bed with worry, regret, or fear, you deliberately dwell in the state of fulfillment. The body relaxes more deeply, the mind rests more peacefully, and the subconscious receives only that which is in harmony with your highest vision. This is not idle fantasy, but the truest form of prayer, for in those final moments of consciousness you are communing with the infinite creative power within. The ancient teachers knew this secret well, urging men and women to guard the door of the mind as they entered sleep. They knew that dreams and waking experiences alike spring from the last impressions carried into slumber. To assume your desire before sleep is to ensure that your last thought is not of lack but of fulfillment, not of longing but of possession. This is the sacred art of directing the mind at the gateway of the night, of writing upon the tablet of the subconscious with the ink of imagination. Some may say, but what if I do not believe? The answer is simple: begin with the willingness to pretend. For even pretense, if done with feeling, impresses the subconscious, and in time pretense ripens into belief. The key is persistence, for repetition of the nightly assumption makes it natural, and what becomes natural soon becomes fact. The world you see tomorrow is shaped by the images you impressed upon yourself tonight. The delay between assumption and manifestation is not denial but incubation, the unseen process by which the invisible takes form. Do not think you must visualize every detail perfectly. What matters is not the precision of the scene, but the conviction of the feeling. If you cannot see the house you desire, then feel the security of living in it. If you cannot hear the exact words of your loved one, then feel the joy of being loved. The subconscious responds to feeling more than to form, to conviction more than to clarity. Trust that the simple act of assuming the end with feeling before sleep is enough, for the law is certain and unfailing. As you persist, you will notice subtle changes in your waking life. Circumstances will shift, opportunities will appear, and people will move into your path in ways you could never have orchestrated consciously. Do not attempt to control these movements or question how they will unfold, for the how is not your concern. Your only task is to remain faithful to the nightly practice, to lay down each evening as the person who already has what they desire, and to rise each morning carrying that inner certainty. The power of this practice lies not in its complexity, but in its simplicity. It asks nothing more of you than to turn inward each night and assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. It requires no ritual, no ceremony, no outward show, only the quiet conviction of imagination. And yet this simple act, repeated faithfully, has the strength to transform every corner of your life. For what you impress upon the subconscious before sleep becomes the seed of tomorrow's reality, and the harvest will always resemble the seed that was sown. Therefore, practice assuming your desire before sleep, not as a burden but as a joy, not as labor but as surrender. Know that each night you are shaping the unseen, writing your destiny in the silence of the mind, and preparing the world to mirror the truth you have accepted within. Asking correctly means receiving instantly in consciousness. For the true act of asking is not a plea for something far off, but an immediate assumption of possession within the realm of imagination. The moment you ask rightly, you step into the end, and in that instant, you already have it, though the world of appearances may not yet reflect it. Asking is not about convincing a distant power to intervene on your behalf. It is about aligning yourself with the creative power that already dwells within you. Consciousness is the only reality, and whatever you accept as true in consciousness is the prayer answered at the very moment of acceptance. To ask incorrectly is to beg, to hope, to plead as though you were separate from your desire. This keeps the thing longed for at a distance, for to beg is to confess its absence. But when you ask correctly, you bypass all thoughts of lack and enter directly into the feeling of fulfillment. You become one with the state desired, and that union is the answer. Asking correctly is simply assuming the wish fulfilled so completely that there is no more asking to be done. It is not repeated endlessly, for once the assumption is made and felt as real, the prayer is sealed. Receiving instantly in consciousness does not mean the outer facts shift the moment you assume, but it does mean the inner state has already changed. The moment the assumption is taken on, the subconscious has received the impression, and the law is set in motion. From that instant, the outer world begins to rearrange itself to mirror the inner reality. To the one who understands, this inner receiving is enough, for they know that what is received in consciousness must, without fail, be expressed in form. The mind that still wonders if it has been heard has not asked correctly. The one who still waits anxiously for proof has not yet accepted. Asking correctly is an act of surrender. It is the quiet confidence that says, "It is done," and rests there. To receive instantly in consciousness is to close the gap between desire and fulfillment, to move beyond longing and into possession. The very act of assuming produces an inward satisfaction, a sense of relief, as though a burden has been lifted, for you no longer strive toward what you already have accepted. This is why feeling is so central. Words alone cannot bring the instant reception, but feeling clothes the words with reality. When you feel the joy, the gratitude, the relief of fulfillment, you know you have asked correctly, because in that moment, you no longer seek. You live from the state rather than toward it. The subconscious being non-selective accepts this feeling as fact, and the outer world must conform in due time. To receive instantly in consciousness is to declare through feeling that your desire is already a fact of being. The outer delay is not denial, but the natural unfolding of what has already been accepted within. The world is nothing more than consciousness pushed out, and it bends itself to reflect the state you occupy. Asking correctly secures the end now, not later. You no longer look forward to the day it may come, for in consciousness it has already arrived. This is the mystery of faith, to believe you have received before any evidence appears. Faith knows that consciousness creates reality, and so the instant something is assumed, it is real, though hidden for a season. Asking correctly also requires that you stop repeating the old state of lack in thought and feeling. If you claim to have received in consciousness, but spend your days worrying, doubting, or complaining, you undo the impression. The one who has truly received no longer entertains thoughts of absence. They move through life as though their prayer were already answered, because in consciousness it is. Their speech reflects it, their actions align with it, and their outlook is colored by it. This is the persistence Neville Goddard spoke of, remaining faithful to the inner state until it solidifies in the outer world. The discipline lies in refusing to contradict the inner reception. The senses may tempt you to deny it, to return to the old belief of lack, but you must remain loyal to what you have already received inwardly. This loyalty is the proof of correct asking. You do not waver, because the conviction is already established. You no longer ask, when will it come? For you know it has already come in consciousness. And that is the true act of asking. When practiced faithfully, this principle transforms your relationship with prayer. You stop treating it as a desperate attempt to reach a power outside yourself and begin to see it as an inward alignment with the power that is your very being. Asking is not about trying to make something happen. It is about recognizing that in the realm of consciousness, it already has. You align with the finished state, and that alignment is the answer. To receive instantly in consciousness is to live from the end now. If you desire wealth, you feel wealthy in imagination before you ever touch a dollar more in the outer world. If you desire health, you feel whole, strong, and vibrant within before the body shows the evidence. If you desire love, you assume the joy of being cherished even before anyone speaks the words to you. This receiving in consciousness is the cause, and the outer must eventually bear witness to it. Many fail because they continue to ask outwardly, hoping for some sign from the world before they will believe. But the world is only a mirror, and it cannot reflect what has not yet been accepted within. Asking correctly means you stop looking for signs outside and instead accept the inner state as final. The outer will catch up in its own time, but the prayer is answered the very moment you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. This is why creation is said to be finished. All possibilities already exist, and asking correctly is nothing more than choosing one and claiming it in consciousness. The moment you choose and accept, you have it. There is nothing more to seek, nothing more to beg for, nothing more to wait upon. The act of asking is complete because you have already received, and your task is only to dwell faithfully in that state. So asking correctly means receiving instantly in consciousness, and that is the only receiving that matters. Once you have it within, the without must follow. The prayer is answered not when the world changes, but when you change within. The instant you accept the end as real in imagination, you have asked, and you have received. From that moment you rest, you persist, and you allow the world to mirror back to you the truth you have already claimed.